thanks for the intro and thanks for staying. Hopefully it will be a good still half an hour on data and innovation and talk about this movement module, which is the title of this project. But just quickly, for those who don't know me, my background is in sports science, exercise physiology. I've done my bachelor in Switzerland, and then it's through my PhD at Glasgow Uni and postdoc that I've learned data science technique to analyze some of my data. And then I went on for a data bootcamp in data science before I joined Catapult 3 years ago. So that's because data science is pretty young as a field, and then you can come up from different background. So I come from the background more from the field and exercise physiology type of background. Well, at the end of the day, hopefully you know what we do at Catapult, but I guess it's a good reminder. So at least the company says we make and sell technology platform to improve sport performance. And for me, my take on that is I take this very simplistic relationship between performance and workload. And for me, what we do at Catapult is we allow people to measure workload, and it's up to people to then decide and to adjust this workload to get the best performance, if performance is taken as a very broad term. So for me, like the first sentence still stands, but for me, I quite like to add those words to stress the fact that it's to help people to improve sport performance. It's an indirect impact, so you still have these people who have to make the decision. Briefly, so I said, yeah, I've worked at Catapult for now almost 3 years, and here's just a few projects I'd worked on. So most of those projects, actually all of them, are based on our initial sensors. So it's not about GPS, it's accelerometers and gyroscope mostly. And so work with GB diving, using especially about validating our gyroscope. Then work with ECB around cricket, and the aim was to automatically detect deliveries and get some metrics around that. Same idea around rugby, to automatically detect scrums, count them, especially during training, to also, again, the idea of measuring the load, more specific to the demand of the sports. And our last one here, as an example, is our G5, our goalkeeper unit, and the same idea is to automatically detect dives and then get some metrics around those dives. And how we do this at Catapult, at least what we're trying to do, is always start with a performance question or start from a challenge or problem or question from the practitioners. And again, as Ben is saying, is try to get also this information from the actual people who applies this. And then it's our job to try to ideate around those kind of performance questions and then come up with our hypothesis, more like research hypothesis that we can test and collect data around it. Then you always have this kind of discovery phase where you test it, pilot it, before you do more data collections. Move into more the data science, because I guess that's my role, and doing some prototyping before, if we are happy with that, going to the implementation and then the application of it. So the very first, the project I showed you before, they're all, the brief were pretty clear and specific. So it was to detect either a dive in football for goalkeeper or a delivery in cricket. So that's very clear. The movement module, so the project now I will just, that's the big project I'm working on. The brief was, let's say, at least broad at best. So initially it was a lot of people that came around, question around asymmetry index, but also just one number or something like this, about movement, about using the initial sensors, because I think there's a lot of things being done with the GPS, but I think there's a lot of value, or a lot of people think there's value in those initial sensors. And it was a lot of things going on. And so the first step was to refine this brief. And to do that, I always kind of use visuals and just to see about what actually can we measure with those initial sensors. So here, the next one, yeah, it's working. So we have a video with, the runner here, the subject is wearing one of our S5. So it just contains our gyroscope and accelerometers. And here what you see, you might be just overwhelmed with everything's happening. But the point here, eventually you will see that some patterns will emerge. And if there is some patterns there, it's probably there's probably some information there. And so I'll leave a bit this video running. And if I then start about, at least what I can tell you with that is what we measure. But again, maybe what, like Paul said this morning, is the big challenge will be, what does it mean? And I can tell you now is I don't necessarily know, or we don't know. That's where so the big step is, and a lot of work needs to be done about what does it mean and how this can be useful. But if you start about what do we measure, so we start with the top left is our accelerations in your 3 dimensions, so up, sideways, and forward. So then if you have your 3D shapes, then you can cut this into different planes. And that's one example of the planes on the bottom left, which is your up acceleration versus your side acceleration. And if you flick your eyes between the bottom left and the video in the middle, then if you see when the dot is at the bottom in the yellow bit, is kind of an estimate of flight time. And I cannot stress enough, it's an estimate. And when you have on the green parts on the left is when he has kind of his foot on the left foot, contact on the left foot, and then the purple would be the contact on the right foot. But I cannot stress enough, especially if you are a researcher here, an academic point of view, say, we are measuring this or we are estimating this from between our shoulder blades. So that's why it would be an estimate at best. If you really want an accurate flight time, contact time, you need something either in the chute or again, an opto jump or something in the force plate or something like this. Top right is something from our gyroscope. So again, the color code is your left and right foot or leg or strokes. And then it's like here is like the idea is to get all your total rotation using the gyroscope through your gate. And the bottom right is roughly similar than this, is your up acceleration, and that also give you an idea how we can then detect different steps. So if I just move, I might not need that one, but I quite like to use also an analogy. So like the brain scan analogy, so your 3D is your 3D brain scan, and then from your scan, then you can cut this in different planes. And again, I showed you just one example, but you have like the different planes. And then you have also potentially similar data, but in a different waves or different ways, so which can give you potentially different type of information. So here is very similar or the same video, or the difference here, and I just move a bit further, it's a different speed, higher speed. So as you can see, there is still obviously a shape there. It's probably kind of similar, there's similarities between the first one with this one. But obviously it's different. It makes sense because obviously you don't run the same way at a higher speed and lower speed. But it's just good to confirm that, and it's good also that it's not completely random and there's still a pattern there. But this is something we need to keep in mind if you want to go further. So I'll move to the next one, which is, as I said here, is just a graph or a visual about to explain that. So if you focus on the first athlete A on the top, so here is an example of his 3D shapes at different speeds, so lower speed to higher speed. So again, you can see there are differences. So we need to control for that. But also, which I just give you one example here, is between people. They have like different shapes. And again, makes sense. You don't run the same way that I do or the people do. Everybody has their own patterns on how they run. So this is something that we need to control if you want to be able probably to give some meaning, some reliable way of measuring those kind of profile. And that's kind of like the inspiration of like then how can we do that is my research, my PhD and postdoc was in anti-doping. And I'm not sure if how many of you are familiarized with the athlete blood passport. But the idea of that is instead of like putting a threshold or cutoff for everybody the same for the whole population, and that doesn't work because everybody starts with a different kind of values, the same thing, like everybody's different. But what we are looking at is probably what is a good assumption to make is your difference between a test, retest is probably similar regardless of where you start. So here then, what it does here, like for this athlete blood passport, is basically you have your test, your blood test, that's your blue dots. And basically then you have those red lines, which are your normal variation. And so you'll be suspicious of doping if you cross the red lines. And all those lines are adaptive to your own kind of previous measurements. So that will be the idea. And by the way, yes, the athlete B will be very suspicious. And actually, it was doped. But moving on, so okay, they have like blood tests in anti-doping. So what can we use as test or something standardized in a more for Catapult clients? So here again, it's simplistic kind of relationship between what I call it reliability, sensitivity in broad terms again, and logistical constraints. So the top right over there, you have your lab setting. which is obviously you can control for more things, but that probably you have also a higher reliability and sensitivity. The problem obviously is almost again what we do at Catapult. The whole point is to bring the lab into the field. So the bottom left, which is the other extreme, is your open play. So, and that's, if you remember also obviously the first video, it's already complex enough. So let's try to reduce the complexity. And that's why now what I'm trying to target is this middle bit, which is your standardized run, what I call it. So it's something like you do in a repetitive way, which is fairly well controlled still, not as controlled as in lab, but still controlled enough that you will probably get something useful. I just also quite like this. Well, add this before I just move on is I don't completely forget about the open play. I think it's not impossible, but again, it's because it's already complex enough. Let's focus on the middle bit before we can discuss the open play. So I think that was a big kind of long intro for refining the brief, and I think that we come up with this kind of brief now with this movement module, which is automatically flag unusual running patterns in your players. Like here for this one, I will also stress the unusual. We don't say it's bad or good. It's just flag something which is different than normal. And it's up then to people again to try to interpret this. Well, it's our job also to help them, but it's still to people to interpret this as whether it's bad or good. So now for this, if we move on a bit more to this kind of prototype or this kind of where we're getting closer to a product, what is this movement module? So there are here at least 6 steps in this module. So the first steps are, well, as a client, so you need to perform this standardized run. Step 2 is try, and that's the first part of kind of our job, or my job was to develop an algorithm to detect or automatically detect your standardized run. I'll come back to that. Then once you have your standardized run, then you can come up with create your 3D shapes. From your 3D shapes, you can get some numbers and and I'll come back to that as well, some metrics. Those metrics, and it will be step 4, you can compare those metrics with your own metrics previously. That's your kind of athlete blood passport type of approach. It can be flagged whether you cross kind of your red lines. If flagged, well, even if it's not flagged, then you can go more in depth at your step 5, investigation of your running profile if you wish to, before at the end of the day you make a decision. Maybe the decision could be, well, not doing anything in the training. So if I go a bit over those those steps, and I start with those 2 first steps, which is again performing your running standardized runs and identifying those runs. And so yeah, we've started to work with some of our clients, and here are a few examples of what I mean by standardized run. Here, so we have, for example, a weekly, twice, 2 times, so we have 4 minutes recovery run at 12 km an hour. That was typically 24 hours after a game. You do have, for example, like monthly or even bi-weekly 10 minutes run at a set speed. You have what I call it more intermittent, because it's a slightly different algorithm, but it will basically give you the same output, is, for example, some max yo-yo test. And then you have also shuttle runs type of test. I'd like to also add, like, also the idea shouldn't be not necessarily a test. I think it could be, well, the idea would be should be able to work in a kind of warm up or cool down, as long as it's kind of fairly standardized. And the idea of the first algorithm to detect those standardized run is we can then kind of tweak the algorithm to be kind of almost bespoke to your own standardized run. That was kind of the idea. And how would it work? So this is one session, for example, and I'm using smooth player load, which is kind of a proxy of speed if you just use accelerometers and the gyroscope. If you don't use GPS, obviously you can use GPS. But the good thing about not using GPS, it works indoor. It also, you don't deal with any kind of accuracy of GPS. So I quite like to use a player load as a proxy of that. And even like here, you can eyeballing. So there is a 10-minute run somewhere in there, so that's not too difficult. But then basically the algorithm now can find those 10-minute run, which is now highlighted in yellow. And basically, very briefly, again, I can answer some of the question afterwards, but so the red dot, how it works. The first step is the red dot, what we call it free running. So it's looking again using your accelerometers and basically the idea of what you've seen in the video, something which is repetitive, and then you just like flag thing when an accelerometer is saying that someone is running. And what I'm looking at, so the next step, because I'm looking at a 10-minute run, and then I look at consecutive way or consecutive points of those free running, and there's other layers to this algorithm. Another point here, and I'll come back to that also a bit later on, here, so yeah, the yellow bit is your 10 minutes run, but to get your 3D shapes, and I guess you've seen from the video, you only need kind of 30 seconds of consistent speed to get those kind of numbers. So instead of having just one 3D shape, we decided to cut those 10 minutes into 3 periods, and that's why you have your 3 green part in the middle. And like this, you can also even compare your profile in the first part of your 10 minutes, in the middle part, and your end part. So once you have that, which is automatic, then again you can get your 3D shapes. And then from your 3D shape, then you can get some metrics. So that's for me the almost difficult part, because I can come up with hundreds of numbers. That's super easy, but I don't know which one are useful and meaningful. That's why I kind of work with those kind of case studies, some data, but that's also we need more data and probably more research to be done, definitely around that. But obviously, I've been pushed to still narrow down to some metrics, and this is a mix between what I've seen so far in the data, a mix of some assumptions, and a bit of this. So for that, now we have 10 metrics, which is divided between left leg and right leg. And again, you can probably understand from the video again how we can then differentiate left leg and right leg. And briefly, so we have the first one is a ground force, which is basically our player load per leg, or cadence. So again, if you identify when you have those steps, so that's your time between those steps. Flight time, contact time. Again, if it was just me, I would just definitely put a big estimate before, and I tried my best to explain that's an estimate of flight time, contact time. Body rotation is from the gyroscope, it's the sum of your gyroscope. And then you have the next 3 are your different acceleration from your different planes, different axes, and your different, also then the rotation from the gyroscope from the different axes as well. And then here, so that's a dashboard where when I put a normal, slightly high, or somewhat low and so on like this is by comparing today's date compared to your own previous kind of baseline or profile. This is kind of the flagging system how we work. So now with with all this, so we have now kind of almost getting closer to our first prototype. And how it would work, again, is we have 3 main levels from a user point of view. So the very first level, if you have the team overview, is basically if you feed everything in the system, it will flag automatically which players are unusual than normal, and it will give you a score for now. Again, that's a lot of things need to be also validated and again checked, but I'll give you also a bit more detail afterwards. Then, and maybe you, as a user, you might just want to stop there and you want to compare does it make sense to have this player flagged today, or you just want to do investigation your own with your own data or other information you may have. But if you want to do this, also dig into more information from Catapult, then you can look at your level 2, which is comparing you versus you, and you have your previous data points, a bit like the athlete blood passport that I showed you before, which give you another layer of information if you wish to. And then the third one is an in-depth comparison. You get your 3D shape, and you can get more other dashboards and other metrics, a bit more biomechanical type of information, which, again, I'm looking forward to have some feedback to see if it's actually useful or not, because, again, I remind you that's a prototype, and the main thing about that is we want to know whether it's worth building this in our Catapult product. So if I go a bit more into details eventually with a case study, which hopefully will be a bit more interesting. But that's an example of the first dashboard. And that's the first dashboard. At least I just want to give you the idea of this is real data, but I just make it up, so just desensitize the name, so that's the wrong names. And that's come from American football team. And here you have, at the bottom here, you can see there is 42 entries, because on that day there were 42 players wearing a Catapult device, which is almost half of their team, so they can go for 100. So yeah, I guess you can see their challenge about also prioritizing their analysis. And what hopefully this would do is actually flag and just rank which one of your players are the more unusual than usual. And hopefully, you can then focus your time maybe on the thing which is probably hopefully more important. Again, this needs to be checked, but that's kind of the first idea of this first dashboard. And then you can select your player, and then you can go a bit more like the idea again, the athlete blood passport. And then the dashboard 3, I'll give you. I'm being too quick. So I'll go back to that. I'll give you just a case study, and I'll then move into dashboard 3. So here I just want to stress that so that's real data that I'll show you again, like everything else I've just shown you before, but it's a fake case study. I just kind of make it up. So I will at least make a few things which are made up. But so imagine like this case study is your team has performed standardized run consisting of 10 minutes run, as we have seen, so constant speed for every week since the start of the season. So you already have your fingerprint of every players. And each of these 10 minutes are then separated into 3 periods, as I showed you before. This case study, so one of your key players is currently in the rehabilitation program after an injury. There's an important game on Sunday, and so the relevant staff member needs to make a decision on whether he should play the game on Sunday or not. And for me, again, that's the relevant staff, that's the medic that needs to make the decision. But maybe because we already have some information, maybe we can provide with more information to hopefully confirm what they were thinking, or maybe challenge and just make sure that they double check if they have a doubt. So for me, my job would be, or the test, or the thing that I want to test would be can we still observe differences in that case, just in running profile pre and post injury. And that's, I just show you, if I hopefully move. So that's what I call this prototype. That's kind of the prototype. I just show you like dashboard 3, which is kind of there, and I'm already in it. I've just selected kind of 2 dates. That's his dates of like pre-injury, and that's 2 different dates post-injury. So you have the green, which is pre-injury. The orange is post-injury. Here you have your the 3 shapes for, and again that's why you have 3, except one date is only 2. It was a bit shorter than 10 minutes, but you have your 3D shapes. Could be, I don't know, gimmicky or not, but then obviously you can go around those ones. But I think where it's a bit more useful is then I try to take an average of all those kind of shapes and then overlay on top of each other. And the idea again, I don't know what exactly it means, or I don't know what it means at all, actually, for now. But again, in my head, what I'm trying to see is there any differences between the green and the orange? If there is, it's probably still a different profile, a different running profile. And this one is pretty hopefully obvious to you too. I think you can see that there is definitely something going on here, and I hope I'm not making it up. If you do agree, so. And then, as I said to you before, then you have those 3D shapes, but then you still have your 3 different plans. It could be able to see a bit more messy here, but you still have the idea of looking at what is different. And again, you have the same thing here, it seems to be. And then you can have the same thing about more temporal type of graph, which is your 3 axes of accelerations over time as a gate. And I'm not sure, again, if this could be useful. Again, I'm looking forward to didn't play. Well, you should be able to play. I'll recharge this. I'll move on. Oh yeah, here we go. So the thing which is before is like the dotted line is it should be your left foot, your left leg, and then after that is your right leg. And again, not sure exactly, or again, I don't know what it means, how we can implement, but then the idea would be still comparing. There are definitely, for me, again, a clear difference definitely here. And again, here I'm comparing like pre and post injury, but it could be also something like a movement that you like compared that you don't like, and you just compare something in those kind of terms. Again, it could be too much in depth for what probably our users are doing, but again, this is why we are doing this prototype and get some feedback to know whether it's useful or not. And I just finished on that where you can still get some like group average. And maybe the last idea of that is because you are looking at still 10 metrics times 2 because you have your 2 legs. The idea is to look at, so you can still find differences in some of the metrics, but not others. So when part of the brief, like someone would say, well, try to keep it simple, just one number, like can we have just one asymmetry index? And I think my channel would say, well, at least now I narrow it down to 20, which is still probably better than more. But I think probably the best, or at least that's the would be idea, is you have like different technique, like PCA technique, I'm not sure if you come across, or here it's called salmon plot. It's basically try to reduce the dimension into a 2D map. And here this is, so every dot represents one of your profile. And although, again, if there are some mathematicians here in the room, then might be a bit more trouble. I took a few shortcuts, but the idea would be still that the further are 2 points, the more dissimilar they are, and the closer are 2 points, the closer they are. And how I would use this is if I can see maybe the last point, my last string session was still around here, which is again highlighted, so the same, so you have your pre and post. If the idea would be to come back towards your pre-profile, is to see when this dot is getting closer to your clusters. Again, that's the idea, that's the concept. I'm not sure if it will work, and we need more data to then confirm that. And I think I'm almost done. Then the next thing is, and I hope, like again, this prototype just show that potentially like possibilities. But at the end of the day, what make a difference is whether, and again, back to what Ben was saying, is it depends about if the practitioner will make a difference. So whether this will be useful and meaningful, that's the big question. But hopefully we can then start to use that with some of our beta partners, hopefully soon, to answer some of those questions and hopefully make some more informed decisions down the line. So thank you very much for your attention. And then I'm not sure if you have enough time for questions. If you do have some, thanks.